and welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. Really do appreciate here on this Tuesday. Well, last Friday, we got a bit of a glimpse into what the federal government's intentions are with their federal climate plan. Everybody's focusing on the $170 carbon tax by 2030. It's getting a lot of attention, and rightly so. Now, a component of the climate plan that potentially I say, has a positive impact for farmers across the country that are producing oil seeds or feedstocks like wheat and corn is the Clean Fuel Standard. And recently, the Canada West Foundation, in a report that was written by Marla Orenstein, I guess it was titled "The Citizen's Guide to the Clean Fuel Standard." We're going to run through that today with Marla and get her thoughts on what could be right and what could be wrong as we get more of the details on Friday when they come out. If you want to participate in today's discussion, all you have to do is enter your comment in the comment box, whether you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, or maybe some of you are on Twitch. You can ask your questions there as well, and we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. I encourage you to participate as we try to kind of learn more about this, because we're hearing a lot about the CFS, and I think it's important as farmers across this country, we get some of the facts and some of the details as we know them as of today. Let's bring in our guest. It is, as I said, Marla Orenstein of the Canada West Foundation. Marla, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Shaun?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks a lot for joining us here today. Appreciate you sending me the report. Very, very interesting stuff. I guess the title of A Citizen's Guide to the CFS, this is really a policy, although it impacts agriculture, it really has an impact on Canadians across the country, no matter what your background is.
Yeah, it really does. It's something that's supposed to impact everybody. And it's also incredibly complex and incredibly dense and filled with all these technical weeds that make it really difficult to figure out what was going on. It took us over a year and a half of working with all kinds of analysis and speaking with stakeholders to even get a grasp on it ourselves. And so we figured the best thing we could do is try to explain it in a way that has relevance for everyone. Just breaks it down a bit.
Well, and we're going to dig as deep as we possibly can, not to get too wonky on everybody, but we will. We're going to try to get into the weeds a little bit here. I guess let's start off quickly, Marla. Can you talk about what the Canada West Foundation is so that everybody kind of knows where you're coming from?
Yep. We are a nonpartisan public policy think tank. So we're based in Calgary, and our mandate is really to help ensure the prosperity of the 4 Western provinces. By looking at federal and provincial policy and what else is going on. We look at things under human capital, trade, infrastructure, investment, and I'm the director of the Natural Resources Center. So anything on energy or environment tends to come to me.
And you get, I guess, you get to work with Carlo Dade, who we've had on this show frequently. So
yeah,
we'll get
he's the director of the Trade and Investment Center, and he's really on his stuff.
We'll get Carlo. We'll get some Carlo stories after the show. Okay. Let's get to it. Right off the top, one of the goals of the Clean Fuel Standard is to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel that is consumed in Canada, and one of the justifications is to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Based on your research, do you think it will actually achieve some of those objectives?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I wouldn't mind digging to the side for a minute to try to explain the difference between the Clean Fuel Standard and the carbon tax, because it's something that a lot of people have conflated in their minds. And so before we talk about how it's going to do it and whether it can do it, let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. Perfect. So the carbon tax, as we know, is introduced and it puts a tax on fossil fuels for the end user, and we get a rebate back later. But basically, it makes those fuels more expensive, and it tries to induce a behavior change by a bit of sticker shock there. The Clean Fuel Standard really works upstream of that end user. It's something that works on the fuel itself, so that by the time it reaches you, it's already a decarbonized product. And we have an analogy in the report that says it's like a liter of gas is a piece of pizza, and Canada's on a diet. And what the carbon tax does is it makes the pizza more expensive, so that we'll buy less of it. But what the Clean Fuel Standard does is turns it into a low-fat pizza, so that even as we continue to consume it, we're putting in less calories, or in this case, we're putting out less emissions. So there really is a difference in what they're intended to do, who it affects, and how it helps us reach those goals.
So do you think it's a mistake, the federal government, when they on a Friday they announced the carbon tax plan? Like they've tied this together on purpose. I've said that whether you think the clean fuels, like whatever you think about the carbon tax, I think that has clouded some of the initial reaction to the CFS, where people are attaching them, and they are attached, but like you described, they are different.
Yeah, and well, in terms of whether it was a mistake or not, it was certainly challenging for us because we had a huge webinar lined up for Monday morning, and suddenly had to look at everything and figure out whether our conclusions were still true. And actually, a lot of them weren't. That Friday afternoon announcement on the Healthy Environment, Healthy Economy plan certainly did increase the carbon tax, but it also made a major change to the clean fuel standard. So originally, the Clean Fuel Standard was supposed to be about all kinds of fossil fuels, liquids, which are mostly gas and diesel, solids like coal, and gaseous like natural gas or propane. Well, the announcement that came on Friday took out gaseous and took out solids, and is just leaving the clean fuel standards to be applying to liquid fuels, again, mostly gas and diesel. It's a huge change with absolutely huge implications to it.
So is the energy industry a little bit more excited about this since they took out solids and gas?
Well, I think one area that's really more excited about this is the ED sector, the emissions intensive energy exposed sector. So oil and gas is part of that, but also mining, forestry, steel, cement, like all that heavy industry, because one of their problems was that they tend to use a lot of the gases, the gaseous fuels, and they get squeezed because, as farmers know very well, you can't necessarily change your prices just because the cost of your inputs increase. You're feeding into a global market, and so your price is constrained. And so they were really worried that they were going to feel the pinch of higher costs. They couldn't pass it on, and it really was uncertain what those costs were going to be. What would happen if those gaseous fuels couldn't be decarbonized? What sort of penalties there might be? So the uncertainty for a lot of industry really lifted with that change.
I apologize for the dog barking. Someone's at the front door. Okay, let's get to what happens when we're live. Okay, so let's get back to my question. Do you think this policy will achieve the goal or the objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, now that it's down to just the liquids, the gasoline and diesel, I think it's a lot more likely because it makes this policy a lot more like the ones that we've seen in California, in BC, in Oregon, and other places where they've been running for up to 10 years. And what we've seen happening out of those jurisdictions is that it has brought down carbon intensity. It has not faced huge pushback from industry, and it's only increased prices a little bit at the pump, generally between about 2 and 4 cents. It's likely to be higher here. We'll get to costs in a minute. But it seems more likely that it can actually reach its decarbonization goals. However, it's a big however, the government has not let us peek under the hood, so to speak. They've not released their modeling showing how it's going to get 23 megatons, which is what they project from these liquids, out of the policy. And that's something we're really asking for is let us see what you're looking at. Let us see your assumptions. Let us see your modeling to see if this actually seems reasonable.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some of those details on Friday, I believe, right?
I hope so. Have you heard, is that when the Canada Gazette's coming out?
That's what we've heard from a couple sources that's what's going to happen. They're expecting it on Friday. So at least that's what I've been telling people all week. So
yeah, well, it was supposed to be in the spring, and then it was supposed to be in the summer. Now it's supposed to be in the winter, and winter's closing down fast. So Friday seems reasonable.
Christmas present. It could be a good present, or it could be a bunch of coal.
Well, I'll print it out and stick it under my fridge. Okay,
what's this going to cost?
Yeah, it's another big unknown. Again, with a move to liquids, it's a little bit easier to predict. The numbers were just flying all over on the solids and the gases. Really, nobody knew. The precedent from BC and California shows more like a 2 to 4 cent a liter increase for gasoline. 2 organizations that did some modeling, the Canadian Energy Research Institute here in Calgary and Navius, they were projecting more like 5 to 7 cents. Some people have projected as high as 11, and I heard one person today who was doing a back of the envelope calculation around 15 cents. again, that's just from the clean fuel standard side. That's not from the increase in carbon taxes that would go on the product as well. But again, we really don't know. But that cost modeling is supposed to come out on Friday as part of what comes out in the Gazette. So it'll be really interesting to take a look at that then.
Is there going to have to be a whole upgrade of some of the pumps? Like that's in the U.S. When they talk about ethanol and they talk about a move to making it a little bit easier for E15 and things like that, there's always a push for retailers to be able to get some money to upgrade their pumps and things like that. Is that an issue in this situation at all?
That's a really good question. That's something that I wouldn't know. I do know that estimates have been made that the blend of ethanol would likely go to about 15% if you're going to hit that target of a 12% carbon intensity reduction. So that would mean, that 15% blend. I don't know the extent to which that's going to require upgrading. But one opportunity that I see is that as part of that healthy environment, healthy economy plan, the government said that it's going to do a national infrastructure assessment. It's going to take a look at all the things that are needed to be able to hit those decarbonization goals, whether we're talking about transmission infrastructure for electricity, or whether we're talking about needing small modular reactors in some places. It may well be that that looking at pump infrastructure might be part of it as well. I'm not sure, but they have promised to do a good look.
So who do you think, based on your analysis, who comes out ahead here?
Well, I do think biofuel manufacturers have a very large opportunity to profit from this. The need for biofuels is absolutely going up. And again, the change that happened on Friday with eliminating gaseous and solid doesn't change that one bit. So I would say that some of the other industries that I would have said were winners, like hydrogen and renewable natural gas, now much less so with these changes. But biofuel is absolutely front and center to be a winner.
Do farmers win? That's the audience is waiting for me to ask that question. Do farmers win in this?
Do farmers win? So I know that there has been a lot of back and forth between the federal government and farmers about the sustainability criteria for growing crops.
The land use requirements.
The land use requirements, exactly. And it's one of these things where the devil is in the details, that it might be a nice idea, but is it going to work for an individual farmer really depends on the details of what's laid out. It sounds like, and I think you were writing something about this yourself a day or two ago, it sounds like they have eased back on some of those land use requirements, that the date of change for conversion to farming land is not going to be 2008 or 2009, it's going to be 2020.
Yep.
And possibly also that it's going to be looked at in aggregate as opposed to on an individual farm level. Those are the two changes that stick in my mind. There may have been others as well, but I do think both of those are going to make it a little bit easier for farmers to be able to play in the clean fuel standard space.
Okay, let's, Brian says farmers never win. Oh, come on. We got to be more optimistic than that, Brian. Come on. But you hit on it, and it was some fantastic reporting by Kelvin Hepner of RealAgriculture.com on our site, talking about some of the changes we are hearing about. I have today on RealAg Radio, I have Marcus Hurley from the Grain Farmers of Ontario. They're still not really, if it does end up being a 2020 as a marker year, they're still not going to be very happy. They don't want any marker year. Could you comment on that? Why is the marker year, like the benchmark year where we're starting from, why is that important or not important from through your eyes?
Well, I mean, the ultimate objective of making any of these sustainability criteria, whether it's a year for conversion or whether it's riparian habitat or what have you, the idea is that we're making sacrifices, so to speak. We're making changes to try to reach this goal around decarbonization. But at the same time, we all know that there's more things than just carbon that exist. There's other aspects of the environment that are important to protect. And so the sustainability criteria are intended to make sure that we're not pulling on the one hand at things that are important for the environment just to put it into the bucket labeled decarbonization. So I think everybody probably has a slightly different view on where that line goes. I'm sure there's examples that we could all think of. I don't think that anybody thinks that chopping down or burning down the entire Brazilian rainforest to produce palm oil is a particularly good idea. But where you draw that line, I think, is really going to depend on what your interest is in the whole in the whole possibility.
Let's keep going here. There's another question here. Brian asks, and if you can't answer, Marla, just let me know. Has high gasoline excise taxes in Canada resulted in less gasoline use than in the U.S.?
I don't know the actual answer to that, but I do know that Canada's fleet of SUVs and trucks, light trucks, just keeps increasing. So people are continuing to buy cars and vehicles that require more and more gas to go the same distance. So I can't imagine that it's the only consideration, or we would see Canada moving just towards more and more light cars and tiny things. So not sure of the answer, but I don't think that's all of it.
Well, and there's elasticity of demand here at some point, right? And I remember interviewing a researcher from the University of Ottawa back when the carbon tax first came into place, and he had done some research on the impacts of the BC carbon tax on farmers. And his opinion is that with the carbon tax, I know we're talking about CFS, but in case of the carbon tax, it didn't deter use based on their research until it hit $100. That at $25, it was sort of just, it was a tax. So we'll see. We're talking about 170 by 2030. So that's definitely over $100. Kara wanted to know, what crops will CFS be relying on mostly in your research in terms of the winners and losers, and farmers potentially being a winner if someone's got to supply those biofuel manufacturers with some feedstock. Or is it the usual suspects of canola, corn, soybeans, and wheat?
Probably. In my research, I don't remember coming across any restrictions on what could be used for any sort of a biofuel. And certainly when the gaseous was in there, even renewable natural gas was a big part of things. Again, now maybe less so. I think, Shaun, you would know more than I do about what crops are really best poised to make a real gain under the clean fuel standards, but I don't believe it rules anything out.
So in your opinion, the energy industry, they're coming around to this now that the change has been made where it's liquid only?
Well, it's very interesting. I've been keeping my ears open, and there's a deafening silence right now. I know that we had Jason Nixon in Alberta instantly, exclaiming that he doesn't like all the new, that whole policy with all its many prongs to it. But CAP, as far as I know, is still really just taking a good look at it. I haven't heard anything from any of the oil majors yet. So I think everybody's just sitting back and trying to figure out what's going on. There's advantages and there's disadvantages. I mean, getting rid of gas gets rid of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion. And at the same time, putting that carbon price of $170 at 2030 suddenly adds a whole lot of certainty. It suddenly means that, firstly, that for the energy industry, they have a lot more answers to go on as to what should we do, where are things going to be more expensive and less expensive, because it really puts a benchmark on everything. So they can start making investments more smartly and figure out what sort of changes that they want to make. Another thing that it may be doing, and I'm sure is factoring into the calculation, is that having this sort of a carbon price at 170 combined with the clean fuel standard for liquids may mean that the oil sands aren't out of play for a lot of investors anymore. It may be enough signal that it can bring investment back to the oil sands.
Can you explain that? Because we're a predominantly ag program, but obviously the energy industry really does play a factor, when it comes to agriculture. So talk about that a little bit. Dig a little deeper on that one for us.
Yeah, so investors are absolutely needed when it comes to putting money into the energy sector, and for all kinds of things, everything from retrofits to new builds of projects. There's actually not a ton of places in the world where you can invest money in oil and gas. There's probably 60 or 70% of the oil and gas that's produced in the world is produced under nationalized companies, whether it's in Russia or Brazil or Mexico. And of what remains, there is not a lot that exists in countries that that you might want to put your money in. Like maybe you don't want to be putting your money in Mozambique or Nigeria. Maybe there's stability reasons to be putting it in Canada. At the same time, we've had a lot of pressure to divest in oil sands, and mostly on that reason of carbon, because nobody is really contesting the other qualities about oil production here versus, let's say, Venezuela or Nigeria. Nobody's saying that we don't have good governance. Nobody is saying that we're not relatively strong on the environment in other measures, even if there's a way to go. It's all been about carbon dioxide and emissions, GHG emissions. This is strong enough that it is something that can be pointed to by those investors who are interested in investing in oil. And there is still money to be made in the oil sands and oil and gas in Canada. But they also have to justify to their shareholders, they have to justify to their bosses when there's pressure saying this is such a GHG intensive, relative to the rest of the world, which is not always true, but they have to be able to justify it. Being able to say they have $170 a ton carbon price, and they have the clean fuel standards on the liquid fuels. It may be enough to be able to say this is being done very, very responsibly and with an eye towards minimizing greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. And that aligns with a lot of the net zero commitments that are being made by the companies themselves.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of hedge funds that one of their investment criteria is green and environmental plans and things like that. So Wall Street always plays a bit of a factor. I believe you said have you looked at the annex for the CFS?
I looked at it for about 5 minutes before we got on this interview. It was the first time I'd found it. I was looking all over for this annex. So I've seen it briefly,
okay,
but really taken a great look.
So one of the things in there is the compliance categories, and so there is category 1 is undertaking projects that reduce the life cycle carbon intensity of the fossil fuels. For example, carbon capture, storage, on-site renewable electricity, blah blah blah. Okay. Number 2, supplying customers with low carbon intensity fuels, ethanol, biodiesel. And then compliance category number 3, investing in advanced vehicle technologies like electric or hydrogen fuel cell technologies. I have I recorded an interview here this morning with Andrea Kent from RI Canada. She's a spokesperson for the ethanol lobby here in Canada, and she was excited about the flexibility of those 3 compliance categories. Where do you sit on the different way you can get credits?
Well, all 3 of those make sense because this was always billed as a well-to-wheels policy. And with all 3 of those things, you really do have, all the way along. You have compliance category 1 would be at the well site, so to speak. You can make process improvements. You can electrify your processes. You can stuff the carbon back in the ground. You can swap out your own fuels that you're using to produce the oil. And then, biofuels is a little bit further down. And then the wheels end is really about electrification of vehicles. So it really does capture all of that. I know that there is flexibility that's being built into the policy so that you can move around between the different categories too, that you can transfer credits between different categories and bank them and save them and use them over a specific period of time. A lot of this is being done to give flexibility so that nobody's accidentally caught out and not being able to produce a fuel that complies. That's actually really an interesting question, is what happens if they can't comply? Because this whole legislation is housed under the Environmental Protection Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA. And as far as I understand it, there are criminal penalties that go along with non-compliance. And it's an issue that's been raised by some as being really problematic, is if somebody's out of compliance simply because there aren't enough credits that are available and you're only allowed to pay, let's say, up to 10% into a fund of penalties if you can't make it. If you're out of compliance, you're legally committing a crime with penalties that go along with that, as opposed to housing it under some legislation that doesn't have a criminal component to it. So I think that's something that's going to continue to be looked at in the next little while. I know everybody wants to reach the objective, but some of these unintended consequences are a little sometimes alarming.
And are those credits, they fluctuate in value? And is that just an over-the-counter exchange then? Or where are those traded?
Great question. I'm not sure that there's 100% clarity on that. I certainly don't have 100% clarity on that. And I've been speaking with others who are still trying to figure out exactly how it's going to happen. We know that credits are going to trade at different prices. And there have been some purchasers who have been asking for whatever mechanism it is, to have enough information that it's not just about price that's listed there, but they can also look at the type of project or the life of the project or certain other parameters that they might be interested in when they go to purchase the credits. It's not just all about how much it costs.
So is there any place here, like do farm level carbon credits exist in this system at all?
Great question. I don't know.
I don't either.
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't know.
Okay, that's cool. No, all good.
Okay.
One of the big, you know what, I'm going to ask this question first, and then I'll get to imports of ethanol. But Brian asked a question I think always comes up when we talk about biofuels, which is the food versus fuel debate. Do you think the federal government's going to avoid that debate based on this policy, or what do you think is going to happen there?
Boy, it's always a really good question. Frankly, Brian, I don't know how much of our food actually goes to Jakarta, so to speak. I mean, I know that we send, for example, a lot of canola and oils to China. I don't know how much less there's going to be. I don't know how much more can be produced here. And the other thing that I'm really interested in is seeing the extent to which biofuels can be created from the waste portion that isn't the food portion of crops. To the extent that we could create those types of opportunities, and I don't know how technically difficult that is. That's fabulous, because that just turns waste into energy, and that's a really good win.
Well, and let's be honest, a lot of the corn, you use corn as the example. A lot of the corn is grown for animal feed, but it's not necessarily human consumption. Most of it's going into animal feed or to ethanol already. So that, even in the U.S., where that was, when the RFS first came out in 2008 or 5 or 8, late 2000s. There was a big, huge debate for food versus fuel, and we saw the big spike up in corn prices. But even that has subsided in the U.S. For a good portion of the debate. One of the pushbacks I'm hearing a lot from farm groups here in the middle of this week, as we wait for the details, if it does hit Canada Gazette on Friday, is okay, this is all fine, this is all great, yeah, whatever, I get it, but all that's going to happen is we're going to import a whole bunch of U.S. ethanol, and farmers aren't going to participate, and biofuel producers aren't going to participate, and energy companies are just going to import it. What do you think about that argument?
I think that's possible. I think one of the nice things here is that I think, unlike some of the other technologies that are being put into place or would have to be put into place by making decisions earlier on and sticking with it, I think the source of a biofuel is something that can move more easily over time. So it may be that at the earlier stages, we need to import more from the U.S. But as we build up our capacity to produce biofuels within Canada, it seems pretty easy to have that take over in terms of what is supplementing fuels within Canada itself. In speaking with the Advanced Biofuels Canada, I believe there's something like around 60 biofuel. I'm not sure if it's refineries or just projects in general that are in various stages right now of being built or permitted. So it does sound like we are on the verge of increasing capacity quite a bit.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. Like I mentioned, my interview with Andrea Kent from RI Canada, representing the ethanol side of that lobby, very excited about the opportunity here for domestic production of biofuels. So you're very correct. I think they see a huge opportunity here, making the industry maybe a little bit more bankable to improve on that capacity. Was kind of one of the things that I got out of her. Now, while I have you here, I want to extend our conversation a little bit.
Okay.
Do you think this sets the stage? Because I talked to you pre-U.S. election the last time, and we talked about carbon adjustments, or I sometimes refer to them as carbon tariffs. Now, one of the criteria is that if Trump won the election, Canada would kind of drop this idea. But now that we have the Electoral College that have voted here this week, we can now, I guess, officially say President-elect Biden. It probably gives the Canadian government a little bit more gumption in this area. Do you expect that we are going to hear more about carbon adjustments going forward?
I absolutely do, because part of it is it was right in Biden's platform, and not just in his platform, but in this huge report that came out from, I think it was the House majority or the Senate majority, on on energy and environment going forward in the US on climate change. So I think border carbon adjustments, or BCAs, or carbon tariffs, are going to be a thing in the United States. It may take some time. It's also brought out in the Healthy Environment, Healthy Economy report. It's explicitly mentioned there, so I wouldn't be surprised. I think that the smartest thing for Canada is if we can form some sort of a block, like a North American, or at least Canada and the United States block on BCAs, and not get left behind, so that we have two slightly different systems going, one for Canada and one for the United States. Europe is going ahead with this, likely. But I think the conditions in North America are fairly different. I think we can both be moving towards that same goal and the same outcomes of decarbonization and eliminating border leakage. But I think the rules and the mechanisms need to be a little bit more different. And we're way more aligned with the US on this one than we are in, let's say, France or the, Czech Republic. So I think creating that block would be a really smart thing.
So the idea here is that, okay, so we're setting up these domestic policies to lower our carbon use and the carbon intensity of fuel and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One of the fights against these moves is that, well, we're just going to import stuff from countries that don't have the same rules. We're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want to just import it because it's cheaper for imported goods because they haven't had to comply with these same regulations or problems. And so that gets rid of it by putting a tariff right at the border to bring it up to parity with domestic products.
Yeah. So do you the North American bloc idea, that's an interesting. So would Mexico be included in that, or would that just be Canada and the US?
Good question. I think logistically it's easier to start with Canada and the US, but but Mexico shares the same issues of geography, of energy production, of huge landmass, of more dispersed population, of indigenous groups. I mean, there's a lot of things that are really common among all three countries that are quite different than what happens in Europe.
So, speaking of Biden, he is talking about a significant amount of EV charging stations across the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing the same push for electric EV vehicles in Canada. Where do biofuels fit in that? Because if the end of the day we're just we have two governments that are pushing towards EV, at some point will biofuels be looked upon as dirty as well? Are they just using us in the meantime?
Well, it's a really good question. I don't know if it's a question of being looked on as dirty as much as does it have declining utility? And I know this is one of the questions that the energy sector faces is they're saying, on the one hand, they're being asked to make really large investments in technologies to decarbonize their product. And at the same time, there's a push to make their product moot, absolutely unusable later. Certainly within Canada. And so it makes it harder to justify making those investments when they see that the base of the purchasers of their product eroding over time. And I think that's the same for biofuels, as it does become part of it, is as we move to EVs, which if we're going to attain those zero emission goals we're going to need to do, there's going to be less gas and diesel purchased, and biofuels will be less purchased for that. That being said, there's still a very large market for them. It's not going away anytime very, very soon. And we still have the United States and other jurisdictions to sell to. And perhaps we can turn fuel back into food.
Okay, so in summation, Marla, how should our audience be looking and providing critical thought to the CFS from your research?
Yeah, so I think the takeaway messages, from my opinion, are the change on Friday was really good. It makes things a lot simpler and more easy to understand. The more transparency that the government can provide, the better and the sooner. So not just providing specificity on the rules, but also showing us why, or giving us costs. How did they get there? I think Canadians deserve to understand how those numbers were derived.
Yeah, can you repeat that? You froze there for a second. So the cost benefit analysis. Can you say that again?
Yeah, just that I think Canadians deserve to see the modeling and the numbers that went into all of this. So rather than just saying it's going to be a 23 megaton reduction and it's going to cost this much, show us how you got there. Let us do some digging around and poking around figured out.
So do you think at all though that where's the threshold though? Like, is there when we get to dig around and poke around and look at some of the cost benefit analysis, is there a number where you're like where Canadians should say, I don't think so?
That's a really good question, and there probably is, although I don't have one. On the cost side, it's kind of, it becomes a ratio. It's sort of the cost divided by how much reduction you get. And originally, the government had said, well, this policy is going to wind up in a 30 megaton reduction, and of that, 23 megatons was going to come from the liquid side, and the other 7 from gas and solid. So now we're down to 23, but more recently, Navius Research had done, a bit of analysis themselves and said, combined with all the other policies that exist provincially and federally, we don't think it can get more than 7. So you're not looking at a 30 on the denominator of your equation. You're only looking at 7. So is it 7? Is it 23? Is it 30? What's it going to be? So I think trying to figure out whether, on top of everything else that exists, this has an additive effect is important to know, and how much additive effect, and that's the only way to really gauge whether the cost is going to be worth it.
Well, I know one thing. I think you described it very well. This is a complex policy that Kelvin and I have been digging into and trying to get information on, and depending on which stakeholder you talk to, you get different versions of what's important and what's not. And Marla, honestly, I really appreciate you trying to shed some clarity on this for the Real Agriculture audience, because if biofuel producers win and the land use requirements are not out of whack with practicality, there's an opportunity here for Canadian farmers, and that's what we're interested in. And I appreciate you sort of explaining it and making it a little bit more clear for us here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on today, and enjoy your early Christmas present on Friday.
Hopefully it's not full of coal, because we already eliminated the solids. So hopefully it's a good news story. Thanks a lot, Marla. I really appreciate it. Want to thank everybody for joining us here today on RealAg Live. If you have some more thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you. If you're a little bit shy during the show, it's okay. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or on social media. You can find us at Real Agriculture, or why not just call the Real Ag listener line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.